It was a quiet morning in Los Angeles. The air was crisp, the streets alive with the usual hum of a city waking up. Children walked to school, their laughter echoing through the neighborhoods. Cars rumbled past, newspapers hit doorsteps, and for most, it was just another ordinary day. But for one little girl, everything was about to change. She was 8 years old, her backpack bouncing with each step, her mind filled with the simple thoughts of childhood, maybe a spelling test that day, or what her mother had packed for lunch. She had walked this route before, down familiar sidewalks lined with palm trees, past houses she recognized. There was no reason to be afraid. Until a car pulled up beside her. The man inside spoke gently, his words easy, inviting. He smiled, his face warm and familiar, like someone she should trust. A teacher, maybe. Or a friend of her parents. She hesitated, but the hesitation was brief. She was raised to be polite, to listen to adults. And besides, he didn't seem scary. Then the door opened. The next moments unfolded in a blur, her small frame disappearing into the car, the door slamming shut, the engine roaring to life. The street was empty now. The children who had been walking just moments before were gone. No one had seen. No one had heard. But someone would. A witness, a single pair of eyes, caught a glimpse of something that didn't sit right. A call was made. An address was traced. And within minutes, a police officer was racing through the city, lights flashing, siren wailing, heading toward an apartment where an unimaginable horror was unfolding behind a locked door. The officer arrived. He knocked. Silence. He knocked again. A shuffle. A breath. The door opened just enough to see the man inside. The officer's hand moved to his holster. Something was wrong. He could feel it. And then, a crash. The sound of footsteps, a figure running, a door slamming open. The man was gone. Inside, on the floor, lay a girl. Motionless. Lifeless. For a moment, it seemed too late. But this wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. Her survival would set off a chain of events that would span decades. Her testimony would become the key to unlocking one of the most disturbing cases in American history. And the man who left her for dead would go on to become one of the most ruthless serial predators the country had ever seen. His name was Rodney Alcala. And this is the story of how an 8-year-old girl came back from the dead to take down a killer. Los Angeles, 1968. A city of sunshine and dreams, where Hollywood glamour met suburban innocence. The streets pulsed with new energy, rock music poured from car radios, teenagers hung out at drive-in theaters, and families felt safe letting their children walk to school alone. It was an era of trust, a time before fear gripped parents at the thought of letting their kids out of sight. But beneath the golden facade, danger was hiding in plain sight. At the heart of this story is an 8-year-old girl named Tali Shapiro. She was bright, full of life, and just beginning to explore the world on her own. She loved to draw, loved to tell stories, and like any child her age, she was still learning about who to trust and who to avoid. On the morning of September 25, 1968, Tali was on her way to school. Her small feet padded along the sidewalk, her mind likely focused on the day ahead, perhaps the lesson her teacher had planned, or the game she'd play at recess with friends. She never made it to school that day. Somewhere along her route, a car slowed beside her. The driver was a man, soft-spoken, warm, familiar. He told her he knew her parents. That he needed help with something. His voice was gentle, his smile easy. To an 8-year-old, he didn't seem like a stranger. She got into the car. And just like that, she was gone. Who was Rodney Alcala? At the time, Rodney Alcala was just another face in the crowd. A man who blended in. Charming, well-spoken, and intelligent, he had a gift for manipulation. People trusted him. Women were drawn to him. He had served in the U.S. Army but had been discharged after being diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. That diagnosis barely scratched the surface of what he was capable of. Alcala had a passion for photography. He carried a camera wherever he went, offering to take pictures of aspiring models, young actresses, anyone willing to pose. It was his perfect cover, a way to lure unsuspecting victims into his web. But Tali Shapiro was not a model. She was just a child walking to school. And on that day, Rodney Alcala was hunting. The witness, the call that saved her life. What Alcala didn't know was that someone had been watching. A concerned driver had seen the little girl hesitate before getting into Alcala's car. Something about it didn't sit right. The man was too insistent, the girl too unsure. A gut feeling. An instinct. The witness did something most people wouldn't have done at the time. He followed the car. For blocks, he trailed the black Chevrolet, watching as it pulled into the parking lot of an apartment complex. He took note of the license plate. He watched as the man led the little girl inside. Then he did something that would change everything. He picked up the phone and called the police. The race against time. Within minutes, LAPD officer Chris Camacho was racing toward the address. He had no idea what he was about to walk into. He arrived at the apartment complex, heart pounding, gun drawn. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Silence. Then, a noise from inside. A shuffle. The sound of movement. The door opened just a crack, revealing a man standing in the shadows. Alcala. Calm, collected, as if nothing were wrong. Camacho demanded to see the girl. Alcala hesitated, then told the officer she wasn't there. But the officer wasn't buying it. He pushed the door open. And that's when he saw it. Tali Shapiro was there. But she wasn't moving. Blood pooled beneath her. A metal pipe lay beside her, the weapon that had been used to beat her. Camacho's hand flew to his radio. "We need an ambulance. Now." But before backup could arrive, Alcala made his move. He bolted. Through the apartment, down a back hallway, out a window. By the time other officers arrived, he was gone. Vanished into the streets of Los Angeles. Rodney Alcala was now a fugitive. But Tali Shapiro, against all odds, was alive. She had survived. And decades later, she would become the key to bringing him to justice. Rodney Alcala had slipped through the fingers of the LAPD, vanishing into the vastness of Los Angeles. Officers searched the city, checking motels, bus stations, anywhere a fugitive might hide. But he was gone. The black Chevrolet he had used to lure Tali Shapiro. Abandoned. His apartment. Stripped of anything that could trace him. And as detectives tried to piece together who this man really was, one chilling question remained: would he strike again? The hunt begins. In the aftermath of Tali Shapiro's attack, law enforcement pored over the evidence left behind. The apartment was a horror scene: bloodstains on the carpet, a bent metal pipe, a small shoe lying in the corner. Tali had barely survived, suffering severe head trauma. If Officer Camacho had arrived minutes later, she would have been another nameless victim lost to time. Detectives traced Alcala's identity through his car's registration. The name they found: Rodney Alcala, age 25. A deeper dive revealed something even more alarming. Alcala wasn't just a predator, he was a former soldier, a film student, a man with intelligence that made him even more dangerous. As police scrambled to track him down, a shocking discovery came to light: Rodney Alcala had a history. He had enlisted in the U.S. Army, but his service was short-lived. He was discharged after being diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. A troubling assessment, but one that barely scratched the surface of his depravity. Warrants were issued. Bulletins were sent out. But it was too late. Rodney Alcala had vanished. Reinvention, a killer's second life in New York. With California law enforcement desperate to find him, Alcala did what he did best: he changed his identity. He fled to New York City, a place where people could disappear among the millions. There, he reinvented himself as John Berger, a smooth-talking, intelligent photographer. Under this false name, he enrolled in the prestigious New York University's film school, taking classes under none other than Roman Polanski, a director known for his dark, psychological thrillers. In New York, Alcala exuded charm. He dressed well, spoke eloquently, and carried himself like a man who belonged among artists and intellectuals. No one suspected the monster lurking beneath the surface. But Alcala wasn't content with just starting over. He was a predator. And he was already hunting again. First known murder. Cornelia Crilly. On June 24, 1971, a young flight attendant named Cornelia Crilly, age 23, was found dead in her Upper East Side apartment. She had been strangled with a stocking, her body left in a horrifying state. There were no signs of forced entry. No signs of a struggle. Whoever had done this had been invited in, or had convinced her to let him inside. Investigators were stumped. There were no leads, no immediate suspects. The case went cold. What no one knew at the time was that John Berger, the seemingly harmless film student, had already begun his spree. The vanishing of Ellen Hover. 4 years passed. Then, in 1977, another young woman went missing. Ellen Hover, 23 years old, was the daughter of a prominent Hollywood nightclub owner. Smart, ambitious, and deeply loved, her disappearance sent shockwaves through the city. Her last known whereabouts? A meeting with a photographer named John Berger. For months, her family searched. Flyers were posted, detectives followed leads. Then, in 1978, her remains were discovered in the woods of Westchester County. Strangled. Left to decay. Police had no idea that the killer they were looking for had already escaped justice once before. And as law enforcement struggled to piece together the puzzle, Rodney Alcala, John Berger, was preparing to return to California. A chilling pattern emerges. By the late 1970s, Alcala was back in Los Angeles, blending effortlessly into society once again. His charm and intelligence disarmed nearly everyone he met. He had a talent for making people feel safe, for slipping past their defenses. And he had honed his methods. Women and girls were disappearing. Their bodies were being discovered in desolate areas, all showing signs of strangulation, sexual assault, and brutal injuries. Law enforcement was beginning to notice a disturbing pattern. All of the victims had been photographed before they were killed. The man behind the camera? No one knew his real name. But one survivor did. Tali Shapiro, the survivor who could bring him down. In Los Angeles, Tali Shapiro was still recovering from the attack that nearly ended her life. She was one of the few who had escaped Alcala's grasp. She was older now, stronger, but the memories of that day had never faded. Her family had moved away, desperate to leave the trauma behind. She had never testified against Alcala, never had the chance to face the man who had tried to kill her. But fate was about to bring their paths together again. The dating game killer. In 1978, the world finally got a good look at Rodney Alcala, on national television. He had changed his identity again, this time posing as a charismatic, witty contestant on The Dating Game. Bachelor number 1, what's your best time? Alcala, the best time is at night. He won the game. But when the bachelorette met him in person, she refused to go on the date. Something about him felt wrong. That instinct may have saved her life. Law enforcement had no idea that the man charming America on TV was the same predator they had been hunting for years. The same man who had attacked Tali Shapiro. The same man who had killed Cornelia Crilly and Ellen Hover. The same man whose collection of photographs held the faces of dozens of unidentified women and girls, many of whom would never be seen alive again. And the woman who could put him behind bars forever. Tali Shapiro. He thought she was dead. He was wrong. Host, archival footage, Bachelor number 1, what's your best time? Rodney Alcala, the best time is at night. Narrator voice, low, deliberate, with mounting tension. Rodney Alcala had been hiding in plain sight for years, evading capture, changing identities, weaving in and out of people's lives like a ghost. But in 1978, his own arrogance would lead him straight into the public eye. That year, he auditioned for a popular television show, The Dating Game. A program watched by millions. A stage where America's most eligible bachelors vied for a chance at romance. It was a moment meant to charm the audience. Instead, it would become one of the most chilling missteps in true crime history. The Dating Game appearance, a killer on live TV. When Rodney Alcala stepped onto the soundstage of The Dating Game, he was no longer John Berger, or the mysterious photographer roaming the streets. He was Bachelor number 1, confident, charismatic, playing the role of the perfect suitor. He was also a predator. And he had already killed. At first, Cheryl was intrigued. Alcala had a smooth voice, a sharp wit. He played along with the game's suggestive humor, but something about him felt off. The audience laughed. The host smiled. Alcala won the game. But behind the scenes, something strange happened. Cheryl Bradshaw, interview. As soon as I met him in person, my stomach turned. There was this energy. Something wasn't right. I told the producers, I can't go on this date. I don't feel safe. And I never saw him again. For Cheryl, it was an unsettling moment. But for law enforcement, it would become a critical piece in unraveling Alcala's true identity. The breakthrough, a face recognized. Following the show's airing, Alcala's face was broadcast into homes across America. And someone recognized him. A former parole officer. That parole officer had worked on Alcala's earlier case, the one that began with Tali Shapiro's abduction. He knew the man behind the name. He knew what Alcala was capable of. And he knew Alcala wasn't supposed to be in California. The officer called the LAPD. Detectives pulled Alcala's file. His photo matched the face on television. Rodney Alcala wasn't just a charming bachelor. He was a fugitive. A man wanted for rape, attempted murder, and now, suspected of even more heinous crimes. Alcala's arrest, a predator caught. On July 24, 1979, Rodney Alcala was arrested in Los Angeles. He had been working as a typesetter for the Los Angeles Times. Hiding in plain sight once again. But this time, he wouldn't escape. The discovery of the trophy box. When officers searched Alcala's storage locker, they found something that would haunt investigators for decades. A collection of hundreds of photographs, women and girls, many smiling, unaware that they were being captured by a predator's lens. Some of them were already confirmed murder victims. Others? Still unidentified. The trials begin, the testimony that changed everything. Rodney Alcala's first trial began in 1980, and the prosecution had a crucial witness, Tali Shapiro. The girl who had survived him. Now a young woman, Tali had to face the man who had nearly ended her life. She told the jury what had happened that morning in 1968. How Alcala had lured her into his car, how he had attacked her, how she had barely survived. Her words sealed his fate. Alcala was convicted and sentenced to death. But the story didn't end there. His conviction was overturned, twice. Legal technicalities forced retrials, delaying justice for years. Meanwhile, new evidence surfaced. Advancements in DNA technology linked Alcala to even more murders, including Cornelia Crilly and Ellen Hoover, 2 women killed in New York. A killer unmasked, the true number of victims. By the time Rodney Alcala was sentenced again in 2010, authorities believed he had murdered dozens. Rodney Alcala spent decades manipulating the system, evading capture, appealing convictions, and leaving behind a trail of heartbreak. In the end, he died alone in a prison hospital, far from the spotlight he once craved. But the questions his case raises remain unanswered. Why was a known predator allowed to walk free, again and again? How many more victims are out there, their stories lost in time? And most chilling of all, how many more Alcala-like predators are still among us today? We want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe justice was truly served in this case? What does Alcala's story reveal about flaws in the justice system? Should serial offenders ever be eligible for parole? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into one of America's most chilling crimes compelling, make sure to subscribe for more in-depth true crime documentaries. And if you think this story needs to be heard, share this video with others. Because in true crime, every detail matters.